Hello and welcome to France 24. I'm Delano de Souza and we are live from Paris. The headlines this hour. Britain's Medicine Authority approves Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. Vaccinations are set to begin next week. And the head of the body assures the public that no corners have been cut. We'll be crossing live to France 24's Benedict Pavio in this edition. The Afghan government and the Taliban announced a deal to continue on with peace talks. It's the first time the two sides have agreed to a handwritten statement in 19 years. And well-known pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong sentenced to time behind bars. The move signals the government remains determined in curbing any dissent. But first, the UK Medicine Authority has given the go-ahead for Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine. Britain now jumping ahead of Europe and the United States by becoming the first Western country to endorse a shot. The chief of the medicines body has reiterated that before approval was granted, every necessary check had been done. Take a listen.
Separate teams have been working in parallel to deliver the most rigorous review of this vaccine. No corners have been cut.
Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has hailed the latest development and said that the vaccine will begin to roll out from next week. For more on this story, we can go across to France 24's Benedict Pavio standing by in London. Benedict, good afternoon to you. Firstly, supplies will be limited in the short term. So given that, who will get their hands on this vaccine?
Right. So since we have this approval in the UK by the British regulator of this Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, we know that the rollout can begin, and we understand that the first 800,000 doses will be available in the UK from next week. That's what Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, announced early this morning. That will be for adults of 16 and over. Elderly people in care homes and care home staff are the top priority. Then next on the list are the over 80s and health and care staff, so the National Health Service. But because the Pfizer vaccine needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees, I understand that the very first vaccinations are likely to take place in hospitals, so care home residents would be immunised later. The UK has ordered 40 million doses of the free jab, enough to vaccinate 20 million people, because you need to have 2 doses of it, and they need to be 21 days apart for you to get that full immunity, which I understand kicks in after that second dose, 7 days after that second dose. What the Health Secretary also said is that the UK will roll this out as quickly as possible, and those doses will be coming from Belgium, and that first load next week, and then really millions in December. But the generalised rollout of that will be actually next year.
You know, Benedict, we have now this ray of hope with the COVID-19 vaccine, but it isn't just going to be business as usual from next week, is it?
No, it's not. I should underline, by the way, that the vaccination will not be compulsory here in the UK. And as you say, it will not be business as usual. People must, and Matt Hancock was at pains to underline this, as were the scientific experts that were assuring us this morning after repeated questions from the media that no corners had been cut. And that is that, you know, wearing of masks, of face coverings, social distancing, washing your hands regularly, all those things, not mixing indoors, for example, as we've gone from a 1-month lockdown here in England to most of the population, 55 million people, being affected by the 2 top tiers. You can't mix indoors. That will be reviewed in 14 days, and we'll see what happens next. But what is really needed is patience and vigilance. The Prime Minister is actually really pleased, but again, underlining that we're not out of the woods yet, so people do need to be careful. And uppermost in many people's minds, whether you're a private citizen, whether you run a shop, a supermarket, whatever, a business, whatever it is the economic damage that is being done also by this pandemic. So the Prime Minister very much saying that this will help to get the economy going, but that people need to be patient. It's going to take really weeks, months, really, for this to be rolled out to the population. And then what will be really important is how many people actually, since it's not compulsory, actually people take it. And the trust will be really important. So fighting, for example, against fake news, fake information of anti-vaxxers, as the Prime Minister has just pointed out, and also the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, will be key.
We'll see what happens, Benedict. Thank you very much for that. Benedict Pavia reporting there from London. Now, as Benedict was saying, England has eased its coronavirus lockdown today. It was in place to curb the spread of COVID-19. Restrictions will, however, remain, with the country now imposing a 3-tier system. The government is hoping that the COVID vaccine rollout will help bring back a sense of normalcy by early next year.
The ayes to the right, 291. The noes to the left, 78. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock.
England has left lockdown, but many Britons may not see much difference, as the country left one set of coronavirus restrictions to go straight into another. MPs voted in a tier system, which places some 55 million people under the strictest 2 tiers.
It's a very important set of regulations to help the UK bridge into the spring, where we hope a vaccine will move us into a whole different place.
Only 1% of England is on the less restrictive Tier 1, which allows meetings of a maximum of 6 people, both indoors and outdoors. In Tier 2, which includes London, non-essential shops can reopen. Pubs and restaurants can operate as long as they obey social distancing rules. But household mixing indoors is forbidden. In Tier 3 areas, which includes Birmingham, only takeaways are allowed and no household meetings, whether inside or outside. This as Britain faces its worst recession in 3 centuries, prompting a rebellion of some 55 Conservatives who voted against the measures.
Why are we going back into the tiering systems? Did the lockdown work or didn't it? And what are the merits of the ongoing constraints on my constituents versus the ongoing visible costs to them?
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have all implemented their own coronavirus restrictions. The UK has the highest number of deaths from COVID-19 in Europe, with almost 60,000 people dead and well over 1 million cases.
Now, the EU's drug watchdog says its longer approval process for a COVID-19 vaccine is safer. The European Medicines Agency says its mechanism is based on more evidence and more checks rather than the emergency one used by Britain. For more on this story, here's France 24's Dave Keating reporting from Brussels.
It's noticeable that the EU's schedule here is much slower than the schedule in the UK and the US. Yesterday, the EMA announced that December 29th day as the first possible day that they could approve the Pfizer vaccine, and then January 12th or 13th as the first possible day that they could approve the Moderna vaccine. That's not so much off from what they originally said, but it had been expected that they might speed up the schedule for approval because they have been under intense pressure from politicians and businesses to speed up that timeline. Yesterday, when they came out with that announcement, it was them saying, we will not be rushed through political or business pressure. So yesterday it was a bit unclear. How will people react to the fact that here in continental Europe, we're going to be getting our vaccines later than in the US and UK? Will people be reassured by the fact that the EMA says it's going to be conducting a full, thorough review and won't be rushed? Or will people be angry and impatient to get their vaccines? I have to say, from the media reaction I've seen around Europe and kind of activity on social media, I would say it's more in the latter category. A lot of people are quite angry at the slower timeline that Europe is operating under. It's hard to say who's going to be proven right here? Because, of course, if there were problems in the initial weeks of the vaccine, the EU won't experience those problems because they won't have been distributing it yet and will have been able to react to that. Of course, if it all goes smoothly and there's no problems, then if Europe is a couple weeks behind the rest in terms of its economic recovery, people could get angry. I mean, businesses across Europe, like here in Brussels at Manneken-Pis, the main tourist site of Brussels, are still shuttered, and they're waiting for vaccines to be available so that people can start going out again. So it could be that people get increasingly restless over the next weeks.
Dave Keating reporting there from Brussels. Now, new coronavirus infections in France have been below the 10,000 mark for a third day in a row. The lockdown in place was loosened this past weekend, with all shops now open. Restaurants and bars, however, remain closed until the 20th of January. And this morning, the French Prime Minister Jean Castex suggested there would be random border checks in order to prevent people in France from leaving the country to ski. Take a listen.
Certes, les gestionnaires de stations font tous leurs efforts pour avoir des protocoles sanitaires adaptés et je les en félicite, mais ce n'est pas le sujet. Le sujet, c'est que nous sommes dans la prévention. On fera des contrôles aléatoires à la frontière, exactement, oui. Et que le préfet pourra ordonner la mise en quarantaine 7 jours.
C'est-à-dire que je suis français, je veux aller skier en Suisse, voilà. Je tombe sur un contrôle, il m'arrive quoi?
Eh bien, il vous arrive que vous serez placé et que vous subirez les tests en isolement de 7 jours. Voilà,
donc mes vacances, je les passerai...
Eh ben, la conclusion à en tirer, oui. Monsieur, c'est que je ne vais pas en Suisse.
In other news, the Afghan government and the Taliban have announced a preliminary deal has been reached to continue on with peace talks. The statement was the first handwritten agreement between the two sides after 19 years of war. For more on this story, we can go across to our regional correspondent, Shazib Walla, standing by in Islamabad. Shazib, just how significant is this announcement?
Well, this is a big breakthrough in terms of the intra-Afghan talks being moving forward. Well, these talks that are taking place in Doha between the Afghan government and the Taliban began in September this year. And since then, both negotiation teams were trying to pave a preamble of negotiations. And only now, after 3 long months, both parties have agreed on a framework of the talks, which is actually the first step and the formal which is the first step of the negotiations, and the formal negotiations will start from now onwards. The terms of negotiations have not been made public yet, but what is for sure is that even with this first breakthrough between the Taliban and the Afghan government, rapid progress in these talks seems highly unlikely. For sure, it is going to be a long and tiring process to negotiate peace in Afghanistan, a country that has been in war for 40 years. But even with this slow pace, the intra-Afghan talks give a lot of hope to the people of Afghanistan who have seen an increase of violence on ground since the past months, and they hope that these talks will lead to a comprehensive ceasefire.
Indeed, we'll see what happens. Shazib, thank you very much. Shazib Bala reporting there from Islamabad. Now, 3 pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong have been sentenced to between 7 and 13 months in jail. Joshua Wong, Agnes Chow and Ivan Lam had pled guilty to charges related to an unauthorized protest last year. Beijing has tightened its grip on the special administrative region in recent years. Over 10,000 people have been arrested on protest-related charges in Hong Kong between June 2019 and this October.
Leading dissident Joshua Wong, carrying books, arrived at West Kowloon Magistrates Court. The 24-year-old, who is perhaps the most prominent face of Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement, is handcuffed to a fellow prisoner. Behind him in the brown jacket is Ivan Lam. The 26-year-old also pleaded guilty of inciting unlawful assembly or protesting outside a police headquarters last summer. The 2 young men, along with 23-year-old Agnes Chow, were sentenced Wednesday. Wong received 13.5 months on multiple charges. Lam, 7 months, and Agnes Chow will spend 10 months in jail. It is her first time behind bars. The 3 activists cut their teeth in politics as teenagers. Wong began protesting back in 2012 against a push to make Hong Kong's education system more patriotic. In 2014, they played prominent roles in the Umbrella Movement, a 79-day, largely peaceful protest for universal suffrage. And then last year, As millions took to the streets, calling for greater democracy, Joshua Wong emerged as a David against Goliath figure in the fight against the Chinese Communist Party crackdown. And Agnes Chow was dubbed the goddess of democracy, as authorities pursued the activists in court and enforced a new security law.
It is even more important for us Hong Kongers to not surrender and to continue to believe in the universal values.
Although they shut down their political party Demosisto in the hours following the enforcement of the security law, the trio has remained steadfast, even if it means now being sent to jail, with Joshua Wong saying cages cannot lock up souls.
Now, authorities in Hong Kong say they are limiting gatherings to just 2 people. This is 82 coronavirus infections were reported in the span of 24 hours. Authorities have been raising penalties for those who fail to follow the rules and wear a mask.